guys, this is word of the day for April 6th. First of all, we've got the word Quixotic. Quixotic means to be foolishly impractical. It's based off of the book Don Quixote by Cervantes. Uh, it's a very old book, but basically Quixote is convinced that he is a knight when he's really not a knight, and he goes famously jousting at windmills thinking they are dragons to save a princess. There's no princess, there are no dragons, there's only windmills. And so, if you're being foolishly impractical, you might refer to your task as quixotic. So, for example, the teacher launched a quixotic attempt to get the students to work with no supervision or consequences. Uh, that's foolish. You should not do that. And so, it would be quixotic. Uh, Science fact of the day: most of a tree is dead. It's kind of a weird thing to think about, but most of a tree is not living. It's only the outer part of the tree that's living. And so uh, you've got the bark right here that's living. You've got the phloem and the phloem and the what's it called? Oh, vascular cambium. Those things are things that help get the nutrients and the water around the tree. And then you've got this part right here. If you've ever cut a tree down, it's that part of this. It's part of the tree that develops the sap. It's called the sapwood, um, and it's thicker here than it normally is on an actual tree. Like if you were to cut down a pine tree or something, it would be like an inch thick or something like that maybe. Um, and then everything else on the inside is known as the heartwood, and it's dead. It doesn't live. So like theoretically, you could go in and mess with the heartwood, and the tree would still live. Which is why sometimes you'll see trees that have been hollowed out in the middle but are still living because the stuff on the outside is still alive. Uh, anyway, most of a tree is dead. Kind of a weird thing to think about. History fact of the day: Chernobyl nearly made Europe uninhabitable. We all know Chernobyl was a terrible thing, and it was a disaster, but it's sometimes forgotten how big of a disaster it almost was. Um, so basically, this is what Chernobyl looked like after the explosion. Basically, a steam explosion happened when the reactor melted down and launched particles all over the place. But in the weeks afterwards, basically, you had this super hot ball of molten uranium that was slowly melting its way through the floor. And the fear is that if it melted its way down far enough, it could get into the groundwater, which would have poisoned the river that Chernobyl was next to, which happens to flow into the Black Sea, which would have poisoned the Black Sea, which in turn would have poisoned the Mediterranean. It could have been a huge, huge, huge problem. Uncalculatable cost to the environment and to fishing and to the livelihood of people. Like, imagine if the Mediterranean was radiated right now. That would be very strange for the people of Greece and Italy and Spain. But there was an even larger concern, and that was that this molten ball would go down, and there was coolant that was below here, and it was worried that if it hit that, it would cause another steam explosion, which would be bigger than the first one, and basically cause there to be the biggest dirty bomb in history, which would have irradiated about 2/3 of Europe and made it uninhabitable for about 50 years, which would have been insane. And so there was all these efforts to try to get in and get that thing cooled down before that happened. Anyway, kind of interesting stuff. And then book of the day, Freakonomics by Stephen Levitt and Stephen Dubner. Very interesting. It's not about economics. It's basically just a way of looking at unintended consequences and the results of. It's basically a way to give you a way to think about things that are a little bit deeper than you typically get. So, for example, Freakonomics, the first chapter is about cheating and why cheating occurs. And so, one of the things that they talk about is, like, for instance, teachers in Chicago were offered bonuses if their kids did well on tests. Well, on standardized tests. Well, of course, what that did was it led to people cheating on those tests. And there were studies done that in the lead up to that, the cheating by teachers went up by like 20, 30%. And then after they stopped it, the cheating went down to like 0.1%. Uh, so and it was the bad teachers that were cheating. So the bad teachers were cheating, making themselves look good, and causing middle ground teachers to look bad. Anyway, it's basically the the study of unintended consequences, um, and what policy decisions sometimes can cause, like there to be, not just policy decisions, but decisions in general. Decisions made for one purpose can cause there to be a subsequent increase in something else that you would have never thought about at the beginning.